Good morning. This is Tracy Hales Bass, right on Four Corners. Today I'm talking to Jeanne Burrows-Johnson from Tucson, Arizona, about the Natalie Seachrist Hawaiian Mysteries. Good morning, Jeanne.
Well, good morning. How are you doing today, Tracy?
I'm doing really well. I really did enjoy Prospect for Murder. I think it's the first of the Natalie Seachrist mysteries, right?
It is indeed, and I feel honored to hear that from you.
Oh, yes. It's so much more than just a murder mystery, though. There's history in it and Hawaiian and Chinese relationship stories. I just really enjoyed that.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Give our listeners a little summary of Prospect for Murder.
All right. Well, Prospect for Murder, like all of the Natalie Seachrist stories, are set in current time, and the heroine of the series is Natalie Seachrist, and she is a semi-retired journalist. Her specialty in her career was leisure and travel, and when she was very young, she was widowed. Her husband had been a young naval lieutenant, and he died overseas, and it was just at the start of her career. And Natalie has been very involved in that career throughout her life, and as we start the murder series, she has just taken her permanent leave from that career as a journalist. She's now freelancing, and she's home-based in Honolulu, where she lived off and on as a young person, where her parents had retired, where her twin brother, a psychologist, lives, with his twin granddaughters. And so Natalie is thinking, oh boy, I'm going to get to catch up on my life now and get to meet and greet friends I haven't seen and be more involved with my family's background. And then, unfortunately, a little murder starts the series and changes Natalie's life forever. And in the series, we are introduced to Hawaiian language. I have a very brief summary. I want to stress that. I'm not attempting to teach anyone the intricacies of such a complex and wonderful language, but I do want people to be able to feel comfortable with some of the foreign vocabulary. And that's why I also offer an annotated glossary at the back. If you're bored and don't want to read it, you don't have to. And in Prospect, we do get to look at Shanghai in the 1920s and 1930s, and we have Hawaiian Chinese sisters who do escape the Japanese attack on Shanghai in 1932, and they return to their father's home of Honolulu. Life is lovely until, again, that murder takes place. Natalie says, gee, I think I want to go investigate. And she packs up her cat, who, as I refer to, is the silent but fleet-footed companion. And she goes right up to the apartments that the girl was looking at the time she died. And that is the entire premise of the first book. So while she's there, she does learn about those Hawaiian Chinese sisters. She does some research for the retired police officer who will end up being her boyfriend, and she's doing research on Honolulu for him. So that all gives me excuses for introducing more historical details. She's had these visions since she was a child, and she never knows when they're going to come on. There's no pattern to them. And they usually begin in sepia tones, sort of like an old-fashioned photograph. And sometimes she actually is looking at something in black and white. That's why in some of the later books she gets confused because she thinks she's just dreaming an old movie. Surprise, surprise, those sepia tones seep in again, and there she is looking at a vision. And so her visions drive what she does, what she sees. And the way I've structured the books is that there is a vision that is the prologue for each of the books, and then it's a very short type of a vision in each of the books. And throughout the individual books, you will find that each of these visions is expanded upon throughout the book. And by the time we get to the end, there will be an epilogue that is another vision that gives you a sense of closure. It doesn't really finish the story itself. That's finished in the last chapter. But the epilogue, I hope, gives my readers a sense of conclusion to some of what has taken place in the story, and settles you down, shall we say?
Right.
As I hope it does for my Miss Natalie as well.
Before you read for us, I'm curious as to your relationship with Hawaii.
Oh, well, thank you so much for asking me. I was, 21, just before my 22nd birthday, and I moved to the islands in 1972 to teach Scottish Highland dancing. In fact, I was booked for a Robbie Burns concert or two that first month that I was there. And I also taught theater classes as well as Highland dancing in the islands, helped to run some Highland games with other people there on both the Big Island, Hawaii, as well as Honolulu. And then after a couple of years, I met a gentleman in the Navy whom I married, and I did return to college at the University of Hawaii, where I got a degree in history and was then chosen to be a graduate teaching assistant in the World Civilization Program.
Oh.
But sometimes I do things a little bit out of sequence or in an unexpected way myself, and so my second language is Spanish. Did have a semester of Chinese, but it's kind of awkward when you're studying lots of Asian topics and that is not your second language.
Right.
So that's my background in Hawaii. I will also mention that I was the volunteer talent coordinator for Honolulu Police Department's training division. And so in that capacity, I dragged out my husband and my students, and we helped to provide final training for the young cadets as they were just about to graduate and be put out on the street. And it gave them a chance to practice handcuffing, if nothing else. So I was in the island and a resident of the islands for about 22 years.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of don't quite count Newport, Rhode Island, where we had to go for one of my husband's assignments. That's when I began my writing seriously, was in Newport. Then we returned to the islands, and then we moved here to Tucson, Arizona. Been here, actually, just as long as I was in the islands. So I'm very honored that the libraries in Hawaii are also taken with Ms. Natalie. You will find the books at about half of the libraries in the islands.
Well, you know the islands well. I can tell how comfortable you are with describing them.
Thank you.
And another thing on your repertoire there is food. Miss Natalie eats some very good foods there.
Yes. We do need to clarify. In fact, Natalie is kind of like I am. I did used to do more cooking. I now refer to it as arranging food. You know, I'm very good at selecting items, adding a little special sauce or something. That's kind of what our Natalie does.
Yes.
She takes things that she's given or that she's purchased, and she doctors them a little bit. But she has an unfortunate history. She has been noted for taking, shall we say, items that are past their sell date. And so her brother does not allow her to bring food to his gatherings. And at some point, she does decide in the series that maybe those pots and pans she got as a wedding gift way back when should be put to use. So she is going to start taking cooking classes, and so that's something new for Natalie to do. But I do like to include a lot of food and beverage because you know that is the essence of what is called pa'ina. Some people would say luau. That's kind of the big formal thing with a pig in the ground and poi and lots of other traditional dishes. But a pa'ina is a gathering of friends and loved ones, and everybody brings food. It's a big potluck, and there'll be lots of barbecue elements. And that really is the way a lot of events take place in Hawaii, centered around food. And so that's why I've put it in the books. I don't include recipes, but I do have recipes online.
You have them on your website, yes.
I do. And so since you have read the book, you know, I'm inviting you and others, if you have a recipe you want to share with me, either on the barbecue-ish side or the dessert tea time side, even a beverage. I'm very happy to consider adding it. And then I get to tell the story of how I know the person who has donated the recipe. It's a great way to get to connect with people and learn the stories of people who have been kind enough to share my Natalie stories, and now I get to learn about their stories.
And your website is Burrows-Johnson.com.
It is. I do want to clarify the first name. It's the French spelling of Jeanne.
Okay.
Jeanne.
Okay.
And the Burrows is Burrows, then the hyphen, and then Johnson.
Well, this might be a good time for you to read us the prologue of Prospect for Murder.
All right. I will do that. Go ahead and read the epilogue as well, because it won't give away the story.
Okay.
But it ties up a couple of little issues.
Great.
So here we go with the prologue to Prospect for Murder. Sepia brown images flicker in slow motion, then shift abruptly to full color in real time as I look through the fence of Honolulu's old Makiki Cemetery. Some of the aging headstones lean into one another as though in conversation. What secrets they would share if they could. I look up at the luxury high-rise condominium looming like a night watchman above. My eyes pen across the low-rent apartments and million-dollar houses stretching into Honolulu's foothills, and then toward the University of Hawaii. A breeze rustles the long, dry grass at my feet. Black as death, a myna bird shifts in its perch in the penetrating fragrance of a eucalyptus tree. I blink and brush a veil of dust from my eyes. The vista shifts. I am suspended above the roof of a 4-story apartment complex. Below, a young woman is sprawled, face down, awkwardly hugging the hood of a vintage car. The heat of the first day of summer shimmers across the polished copper of her long, tangled hair. I observe the scene with the dispassionate interest of a newswoman. A uniformed police officer takes notes while interviewing a small, elderly Asian woman. The demanding wail of an approaching ambulance slices the midday air. Everything freezes mid-frame, again subsiding into sepia tones that harmonize with the trail of blood pooled and drying below the girl's outflung right hand. I stare as a silver bracelet flashes the sun's rays up at me. My breath catches on the sickening sweetness of a blended scent of plumeria flowers and blood. I exhale and try to resume breathing normally. My heart throbs in rhythm with a metallic ringing in my ears. Slowly, my hand reaches for the telephone. My twin brother Nathan is calling to tell me what I already know, that my grandniece will not be graduating from college, will not be participating in this weekend's pipe, or anything else on this plane of existence. Needless to say, there are a lot of rewrites that go into these things. In fact, I might volunteer one detail so that people understand. I write very lengthy prologues, and then I whack them down to the bare bones, way they appear at the beginning of the book. And then that original material feeds into future visions that Natalie has. So they are expanding visions through the book. And so that's part of my process.
And so is that where you start? Do you start right at the prologue?
I actually do a mixture of things.
Mm-hmm.
I write both prologue and epilogue as I feel inspired.
Right.
And quite often that is at about the beginning. I also write a bit of an outline, but to say I methodically follow it the way someone like you, a wonderful instructor of literature, would teach, I'll confess I don't do. I do write as I'm motivated and as I'm moved. And also there's a lot of research that goes into what I do. For that first book, by the way, I found a real British ship.
Oh.
I found the real menu, and I found photos of it, and I really discussed the reality of it. So when I've completed a chunk of research, I may begin writing passages that will refer to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's kind of a mixed method, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
that I employ. I do try to write it sequentially,
Mm-hmm.
but again, there are those aspects of the expanding visions and the results of my research that kind of interrupt the flow of writing chapters 1 to 20 plus.
Yes, it shows how much research you do in the book.
Well, I'm delighted that you did notice that.
Oh, yes.
And I actually had someone who is she would be in your field as well, although at the high school level. I had a local poetess with whom I was doing some writing ask me, she queried whether or not what I write is true history.
Oh.
And I said, well, as a graduate of University of Hawaii's history department, I would be in deep kimchi if I do not tell the truth.
Right.
And only thing I really fabricated was having one of carry candy in his pocket for children.
Right.
So that was the one way I deviated from the truth. But who knows? Perhaps they did have something like that.
It's not unbelievable, for sure.
That's right.
And you have won several awards for these books.
Oh, thank you so much, so much. I appreciate your mentioning that.
Mm-hmm.
I was a finalist last year for Prospect for Murder for the, what was it? I think it was Mystery Suspense category, they called it at that time.
Uh-huh.
And we did take first place for the evocative art that's on the cover.
Right.
And I will have to say that the designs for the cover have begun with images I have in mind.
Oh.
But then the wonderful Yasmin June brings them to professional finish, shall we say, and she does beautiful work. Each of the books, by the way, has a gold frame that reflects what is called Hawaiian heirloom jewelry.
Oh.
Some of your listeners may be familiar with it. If you've seen the gold or silver bracelets with heavy carving on them that are then rubbed with blackening, and sometimes they have words on them, sometimes they're just flowers or other images from the island.
Right.
And so that is what frames each of the covers
Oh.
on the books. And then the corners have an image of an hibiscus, which is also used as an image.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is folio art around the page numbers.
Right.
And that's a little something I designed with an hibiscus and a little flower, a flourish, I guess we would say, at the end of it.
I noticed all those added touches, and I like them very much.
Oh, I am so glad that you do. You know, some people want everything stripped down to bare bones. I'm even told that there are instructors. I don't mean to step on your toes if you're one of them.
No.
But I'm told there are instructors who absolutely do not want any verbs used for description of speaking other than said. He said, she said, the leader said, the president, and I can't work that way. You know, I want it to be full flavored.
Yes.
And I do like classic touches like a cast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
For one thing, I find that with the foreign, that is non-English terms and names, people will get confused. You know, who begat whom?
Right.
Who was the murder victim?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that person in the same family? And so that's why there's a cast mentioned at the front.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the other materials that I mentioned at the back end so that people have a sense of where they are. And I also use aphorisms, that's quotes, at the start of each of the chapters that
Yes.
I hope are relative to the topic.
I was quite impressed with those quotations at the beginning of each chapter.
Well, I want you to know I continue to add to my list. I'm up to about 130 pages of quotes, and I'm very careful about copyright, which basically means the quotes have to be at least 75 years old.
Right. Right.
Or we're stepping on another
That's
writer's and other
right.
author's.
Murder on Mokulua Drive is the second Natalie Seachrist.
It is.
And what happens after that? Or will there be another?
Oh, honey, we are just at the point where the third book, which is Murders of Conveyance, is about to be released. It's going to be going out in galley form for reviews, and that's coming very soon. And I'm actually working to complete book 4, which is Yen for Murder. I will mention that Murder on Mokulua Drive does center on a little girl. Well, not as a little girl, but when she was a little girl, she escaped from Denmark to Sweden. She's a little Jewish girl, and she grows up to be a human rights activist. And many years later, there happens to be a sad little garroting that takes place in a seaside community called Lanakai on the island of Oahu, where Natalie and Keone have moved. And so we get to have them exploring that in that book. But in the third one, which is about to come out, it's a rollicking good time. There's a scavenger hunt across Oahu during Chinese New Year, and we have 2 murders this time, separated by 60 years. Natalie's visions are very important to this because they pertain to both mid-20th century and today. And so they are again working with Keone's old partner, Lieutenant John Diaz of the Honolulu Police Department, who's quite taken with Miss Natalie's visions. If she'd just have a few more, his desk would be so clean he would have no cases to examine. Unfortunately, of course, Natalie does not have the ability to call those visions up on cue, so he has to take what little bit she's able to feed him from time to time.
I love the way the police department accepts her visions.
Well, we need to be very careful about this. As I've made clear, she could not be giving testimony in a court of law. And so she's very much behind the scenes. You know, there are a lot of police departments who will examine what someone who is clairvoyant or who has visions may say, but they have to be very careful in following rules of law in what they do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as John Diaz explains, I think in the second book, he had an auntie of his own who was of the Irish background. She had what is called kennings. She just sort of knew things. So he is perhaps a little more open to listening. And of course, having evidence prove out is what makes all of the difference. So I'm very careful about how I handle this issue, because I wouldn't want the public, let alone public safety officers, to think I'm getting too carried away with it. So again, they will look at it, they will think about it, but unless there's some real proof to back up what's being revealed, it's just sort of hearsay and interesting background.
And I think you showed that in the case of Ariel, when Natalie had the visions, but until the police could prove something or find evidence, they really were helpless.
Right, and that's going to be true throughout everything that takes place. Although, as John Diaz says in the third book, he says the following: "Hope you haven't been having any more of those visions lately. We said you'd take about a year's break," and that is, of course, after we've gone through 2 books. And but he does know when she says, "John, that dream I said I'd had, about an old movie, there are a few too many parallels to the crime you've just discovered."
Uh-huh.
And so she does have to, occasionally pop up and say, "Gee, yes, I have had another one of those nasty visions, and here's what I've learned."
Right. Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait to read those.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of aunties, what is the Conversations with Auntie Carol?
Oh, Auntie Carol. Oh, this is such an exciting project. Caroline Kulia Ikanuu Kapu, Wilcox de Lima Farias, to throw out all the different names.
Wow.
Wonderful, wonderful woman. I met her right away arriving in the islands in 1972. I taught her daughter Highland dancing, and then I also coached her a little bit in language arts for a while. And Auntie Carol danced at my wedding, and we were friends for a very, very long time. And toward the latter days of both her life and my time in the islands, she decided she wanted to make donations of family heirlooms to a local school, St. Andrew's Priory for Girls, where her family had gone to school, and there were other things that she wanted to gather together. And so I started helping her with research and helped her with some of the facilitation of the donations. And then we thought perhaps we'd tell the story of the women in her family. And so I did 7 interviews with her. And they sat there, and sadly she passed, and I had moved here, and we weren't able to finish that project that we had envisioned together. And so they sat on my shelf, the interviews. And then last year, I had them turned into MP3 recordings, cleaned up a little bit, although the first one is a little bit rough. And I looked over the manuscripts from it and said, "Gee, I really should be sharing this." And people have loved hearing the stories about her and her elder cousin, who was the first woman registered to vote.
Oh, wow.
In 1920 in the territory of Hawaii.
Oh.
And also Carol's own story. I mean, my goodness, on December 6th, a Saturday, in 1941, the woman was dancing hula, awana, meaning modern, in Waikiki. Needless to say, that woman didn't get home to Maui for a few years. And she does talk about what it was like to work at the naval station in Pearl Harbor during the war. And there's also an awful lot of food again.
Great.
And a discussion of holidays and all. One of the sad details that is revealed is that upon her marriage, she had to take a vow not to perform again professionally. And about 2 days, I try not to cry when I say this, about 2 days before her wedding, her hair was cut. And her hair had reached below her knees.
Oh, my gosh.
And it had never been cut. And, it's one of those stories that for a young woman in this country, I mean, first of all, how could women not have the right to vote?
Right.
And how could a woman be asked to no longer pursue her career
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that she wouldn't? Her hair had to be cut.
Oh, my gosh.
And, of course, today, women perform hula, both ancient kahiko as well as awana, the modern. They perform it with hair of every length,
Mm-hmm.
and there are women of every ethnicity that perform, not just, Hawaiian people. And I shouldn't exclude the men. I'm sorry, gentlemen, if you are involved with hula. There's some wonderful men and some wonderful kumuhulas, the master teachers that are of both genders, and they do some wonderful work to keep the culture going and to revive it and to grow it, and it's very exciting. But that's some of what I have to offer in the story of Auntie Carol. And her warmth, her love of family and culture is so exciting. And she discusses how the pigs go into the ground.
Wow.
And she just describes what it was like to grow up in the country,
Mm-hmm.
what Mama's garden was like, and she reveals some of her recipes. It's great to be able to tell her story. And I think that a younger readership today will be interested in some of the social as well as specifically women's history
Right.
that it tells. So I'm hoping to find the right kind of a publisher. It'll have to be, unfortunately, a little bit more academic, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
than my lovely Jeff Habiger at
Mm-hmm.
Artemisia Publishing for the mysteries. But I am about to seriously look across both the islands as well as the mainland and see who might be appropriate for a project like that.
But people can hear some of those on your website now.
Oh yes, I should mention there are audio samples on my websites, both the Jeanne Burrows-Johnson website as well as Imaginings.
Okay.
And so there's a snippet from the Auntie Carol Project. There's a snippet from an anthology I did with local authors here called Under Sonoran Skies.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a number of different audio samples that a visitor to the websites can sample.
Oh, that's exciting. Very exciting. You have a rich life.
Thank you.
Yes. And we are just about out of time.
Very good. Well, it's been so great to get to visit with you, Tracy.
And you too, Jeannie.
Thank you so much.
And that was Jeanne Burrows-Johnson, author of the Natalie Seachrist Hawaiian Mysteries. This is Tracy Hales-Vass, right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.